Generation seems to serve the needs of that generation.
And it is very important to, in order to get a good idea of Rembrandt, the man, it is important to try to balance these scanty data we have from the documents, because it's still kind of reconstructing a biography rather than knowing enough in order to come up with a kind of, rich and detailed picture of this man.
Questions about his personality may never be answered, but no one can doubt that Rembrandt Harmensen van Rijn realized the greatest expectations of himself and Dutch painting. He was a world-renowned master in his own lifetime and one of the most prolific. For nearly 4 decades of the 17th century, the energy in his Amsterdam studio kept pace with the city streets outside. In the first half of the 17th century, Amsterdam was booming. 4 of the city's main canals were brand new. They were filled with boats moving cargo to and from the bulging warehouses of city merchants. In his whole life, Rembrandt probably never traveled more than 50 miles outside the city walls. Luckily for him, and for us, the Dutch shipping fleet brought the world to him.
Amsterdam had absolutely everything to do with Rembrandt's success. Amsterdam was becoming the economic center of Europe.
There was more religious dissent, more discussion, more activity in intellectual life. And Rembrandt would have picked this all up and participated in it.
Today, Rembrandt's house has been lovingly restored. As the surrounding city grows into the 21st century, the house recalls the city's glorious past. Within these walls, it is easy to imagine the scene of Rembrandt's greatest success. A spark of genius lingers from his day's work. Rembrandt is finishing a group portrait for a Civic Guard unit. It is an important commission. The work will be publicly displayed, not hidden in a private home. It is a chance to break into the more lucrative game of public commissions. It is known today as the Night Watch. It is priceless. The painting glows. The texture of the paint picks out the light. It directs the viewer's gaze and keeps it moving along dramatic diagonals. From the deep background to the captain's hand, which seems to reach right out of the frame.
The Night Watch is an extraordinary painting, and for the time it would have been just mind-blowing. You stand in front of that painting and you feel that these figures are there with you, interacting with you.
In technique and imagination, it is a first. But in subject matter, it is typical Rembrandt. Many of these men are new immigrants, and most of their wealth is new. Rembrandt presents them in a medium and on a scale previously reserved for religious themes and royalty. His talent for capturing the living likeness of his subjects is at the very heart of his life's work. Without pretension or sentimentality, he gives us people from all walks of life, the merchants and beggars, young and old, that populated his world. And remarkably, he gives us himself. He was called Harmensen after his father, Harmen, van Rijn after the Rhine River that powered his father's mill. He was born in 1606 in Leiden, Holland's second most prosperous city. Rembrandt's mother was a baker's daughter, but her family had patrician roots.
Rembrandt grew up in a pretty well-to-do family. A mill sounds kind of modest, but actually it was more like a factory. The father would bring in grains from the countryside, and he would prepare them for use mostly by brewers.
He was sent to the town's Latin school, then enrolled at the University of Leiden. He may have had ulterior motives.
Students didn't have to pay certain taxes, for example, on beer, which is a wonderful thing. I mean, you can get a lot of students into universities these days also by giving them discount beer. Also, it helped them keep out of military service, which was extremely important.
It was a period when art was a respectable profession, one that offered good career opportunities. Rembrandt's choice to be a painter would forever change world art. Rembrandt was apprenticed to Jacob van Swanenberg, a painter in Rembrandt's hometown, Leiden. It was an ideal place to start. The city had produced several notable artists, including Otto van Veen, the teacher of Rubens. As an apprentice, Rembrandt took lessons in drawing and painting. In return, the family paid a yearly fee, and Rembrandt did chores: washing brushes, stretching canvas, preparing grounds, and when he had enough experience, mixing paints.
Paint was a problem. The tube was not invented yet, so you had to prepare the paint yourself in the atelier. You used pigments, could be from sand, for example, yellow ochre or the red ochre. And you grinded that until you got a beautiful loose pigment. Or maybe you took some beautiful stones, like the lapis lazuli, very rare stone, and then you got the beautiful pigments, ultramarine. For the black, for example, people were used to burn teeth and bones of animals or of human beings, and then you got the bone black pigment, which was used for the black. You took a little bit of the pigment, you mix it with oil, and then between two stones like this, you work quite hard and quite long until it gets a beautiful mixed paint.
The next stage in Rembrandt's apprenticeship was learning the teacher's style. Typically, he would have copied Van den Belck's paintings. Copies were in high demand. The Dutch were avid art lovers. Those who could not afford to commission or collect originals eagerly snatched up copies to fill their homes. In 1625, Rembrandt seized a chance for further study with a prominent Amsterdam artist. His name was Peter Lostman.
He came in as a senior assistant, as it were, a qualified graduate of the basic school of art. And what he studied with Lostman were the finer points of art, the making of compositions, the coloring of your paintings.
With Lostman, Rembrandt was introduced to the workings of the international art market.
Amsterdam definitely was a metropolitan kind of city with a lot of people who had enough money to buy the products, and among these products, painting, precious paintings as well.
Rembrandt stayed 6 months, then returned to Leiden. Once home, he set himself up in a studio and began taking students of his own. He entered into a friendly rivalry with another local artist named Jan Lievens.
Some say that Jan Lievens and Rembrandt shared the workshop in Leiden, but that's not known for sure. It's sure that they worked sometimes together on the same subjects, maybe even on the same paintings.
By 1630, Rembrandt and Lievens had earned the admiration of Constantijn Huygens, a connoisseur of painting, and secretary to the Stadhouder, the highest military and political official in the Republic. Huygens spread the word about a pair of young and noble painters of Leiden and gave Rembrandt some of his earliest commissions.
Constantijn Huygens lavished important, expensive commissions on him for a number of years. So Rembrandt was spoiled at a young age by extremely generous patronage.
Rembrandt's early paintings are in a finely detailed style. He is already experimenting with the high contrast between light and dark, called chiaroscuro, that will be his hallmark. Huygens especially admired Rembrandt's ability to depict emotion. He singled out a painting called The Penitent Judas Returning the 30 Pieces of Silver for special praise. Huygens also encouraged Rembrandt to travel to Italy to study the examples of such Renaissance masters as Leonardo and Raphael. Rembrandt's response caught his patron off guard.
His answer was, it is not necessary to do that because everything that is important and everything that is so much in demand right now is something you can see here.
Italian art was plentiful in Amsterdam. Collectors brought in original paintings and copies, as well as prints of sculpture and architecture. Whether arrogant or simply practical, Rembrandt preferred to spend his youth in Holland. These are also the years of Rembrandt's earliest self-portraits. As the young artist labored to create emotion and light from paint, he was his own most patient model.
Now, the word self-portrait did not exist in the 17th century. They called it portraits of Rembrandt painted by Rembrandt, which is a nuance of difference. But not all what we call self-portraits, were portraits of Rembrandt by Rembrandt. Some of them were studies, like this painting of the Rijksmuseum is a study. It is a study for a complicated painting where his great inventions about dealing with light were realized. Then there is a third category of so-called self-portraits. We call them tronies, which is character heads.
The trony is an image of a head, which were very popular at the time. In many cases were as popular as portraits or more, and more valuable in some cases. The exotic was very popular.
These are paintings where, like a painting like this is not a portrait. This is an old woman, which, with all its allusions to piousness and piety and other associations with old age. Such paintings were popular to have on the wall, also of soldiers, of oriental figures, whatever. And they were painted after the model. You could also use your own face. So Rembrandt probably painted quite a few of these character heads using his own face, which then later was recognized as his own face, and then such a painting was also called a self-portrait.
Probably the most distinctive feature of Rembrandt's art is his willingness to experiment and show the kind of dynamism that can produce a psychological interaction with the viewer that is quite exciting.
Rembrandt's work was outgrowing the opportunities available in his hometown. With a national reputation developing, he set his mind on Amsterdam. Rembrandt was around 25 years old when he moved to Amsterdam. He had international ambitions.
Amsterdam was growing from a population of 50,000 to 150 to 200,000 by the second half of the 17th century. So the move to Amsterdam is perfectly understandable in terms of leaving the small time for the big time.
The city was home to merchants and stockholders growing rich on New World trade in tobacco and slaves, spices and arms. Wealth poured in with refugees from Portugal and Poland, and grew in speculations markets on everything from real estate to tulips. They all wanted their portraits done by great artists. Rembrandt decided to stake his claim.
It is interesting to see how important the market actually was for artists when we realize that Rembrandt, before he moved to Amsterdam, with the exception of self-portraits and maybe a portrait of his mother, never produced a portrait. He did not receive any portrait commissions from people living in Leiden.
The Guild of St. Lucas controlled the Amsterdam art market. Before Rembrandt could qualify to join, he had to establish residency in the city. In the meantime, he invested 1,000 guilders with the art dealer, Henrik Allenberg.
More than half the population of Amsterdam made less than 300 guilders a year. So this was 3 times, or a little more than 3 times, what a normal working class person in Amsterdam would make.
In return, Allenberg acted as a kind of agent for Rembrandt. Allenberg was connected.
He had contacts with the regents of Amsterdam. He brought in commissions for expensive group portraits, for a stall of artists with whom he had contact. He operated a training school for young artists. He was obviously well capitalized in this period. And so Rembrandt had a step up in his arrival in Amsterdam.
The commissions that he got through Van Allenberg between 1631 and 1635, he painted, it's estimated, around 50 portrait commissions, many of which are now lost. We only know from inventories.
The Surgeons Guild hired Rembrandt to commemorate a public dissection of a human corpse by their chief lecturer, Dr. Tulp. The event was rare and open to the public. The anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp catapulted Rembrandt to the top ranks of portraitists. It is the first painting Rembrandt signed with the single name Rembrandt, imitating the Renaissance masters Raphael or Leonardo. It was praised for its original asymmetrical composition and its dramatic action. Frozen in time, The doctor demonstrates how the tendons of the arm move the fingers and the thumb, a gesture essential to a surgeon or a painter.
Rembrandt's composition of this painting was a radical departure from previous anatomy lessons. Rembrandt has turned a demonstration into a narrative, and turned that narrative into a narrative of a particular moment. And that's the kind of momentary quality that gives you the sense that you are there participating in the experience.
Henrik Allenbach would change Rembrandt's life in another unexpected way. Through him, Rembrandt met Saskia, Henrik's 20-year-old cousin. The youngest of 8, Saskia was orphaned at age 12. Her parents had left her a substantial inheritance. Rembrandt married Saskia in June 1634. They lived with Henrik for 2 years, then rented a house of their own.
You may well wonder what Saskia's family thought about her marriage to Rembrandt. In the first place, I think it wasn't a bad match. He had gotten some very good paying commissions. He was obviously earning a lot of money, up-and-coming young man in a promising field in Amsterdam.
Rembrandt finally qualified to join the Painters Guild. He left Allenbach to open his own studio and gallery.
Rembrandt was taking a risk to go out on his own, because he would have to drum up his own students and drum up his own patrons. But he also had established himself well enough, so he seems to have been done very well and started attracting students who then went on to become very important painters in their own right.
Rembrandt attracted students by the dozen and charged top dollar. He rented a warehouse for their workshop and divided it into cubicles so each student had a private space to work. There is a story that one day, one of Rembrandt's students brought a girl to his cubicle to model nude.
And because it was very hot, he got rid of his clothes as well. And apparently told her that both of them were right now like Adam and Eve in paradise.
Rembrandt overheard the comment and took the final role in the scene unfolding, the role of God. He burst in on the couple, saying, "Now it's time for you both to leave paradise."
It is an anecdote, but as always, there might be something of truth behind this anecdote. And well, apparently he had a kind of sense of humor, no doubt about that.
Rembrandt delighted in painting his bride, costumed or casual or nude, a goddess or a biblical figure, or joining him at a rowdy drinking contest. But marital bliss was soon marred. A baby boy was born in December, but died in February. A baby girl the next year lived only a few short weeks. As Rembrandt and Saskia settled into routines, Saskia's family began to worry. They complained of the couple's seemingly extravagant spending.
Saskia's family didn't care for Rembrandt. The relatives saw Rembrandt and Saskia living high off the Hague in Amsterdam and began gossiping about them. Well, Rembrandt sued them for libel because of this. Came into court, and thank God that he was able to earn enough that they were able to spend what they want without endangering her money.
Saskia's inheritance was intact, but still Rembrandt lost the libel suit. The court agreed with his in-laws. What reputation had a common painter to lose? By 1639, Rembrandt and his wife Saskia had buried 2 babies and alienated Saskia's family.
Rembrandt's personal life is actually very sad. He had some nice times, you assume, with Saskia, but even that marriage was marked tragically by the death of 3 children in infancy before a son was born who lived.
The couple began to look for a permanent home and found it just around the corner from Saskia's cousin Henrik. Rembrandt took a mortgage on the heavy asking price.
The sum was 13,000 guilders. He paid 3,000 guilders of it, and the rest he promised to pay in the forthcoming years.
When he purchased his house in 1639, the selling price was 13,000 guilders. Again, an extraordinary sum when you think that more than half the population of Amsterdam was making less than a guilder a day, or 300 guilders a year.
Though well beyond his means, the house was perfectly suited to his needs. Family, gallery, and workshops all neatly tucked below one roof.
Well, here we are in the front part of the house, the entrance hall of the house. And here we see the front door of the house. He was, besides being a painter and a teacher, also an art dealer. And this was the place where he exposed all his paintings he bought on auctions and paintings he made in his own studio. People could enter his art gallery from that door and then have a look around and maybe decide to buy a painting or to give an order for a portrait done by Rembrandt. He was really a businessman. Over there you see a small window, and there was a small administrative office. So a person that helped Rembrandt working in this place and helping the clients could have been working over there. And through the window he could keep an eye on the shop and the people that entered the art gallery.
From 1639 to 1642, Saskia's health was declining. Rembrandt often stayed by her side. A third baby was born and died. There is a rumor that Rembrandt built a shed in the courtyard. From there, he could keep a constant vigil on Saskia while he worked on his latest and most important commission.
For once in his life, Rembrandt got a commission to paint a group portrait for the Civic Guard. These were the most public commissions to be had in the city of Amsterdam.
In the 17th century, there were no museums. In order for an artist's work to be seen, it had to hang in public places. The halls of the Civic Guard were the most public in the city. They doubled as inns and taverns. Rembrandt's Civic Guard portrait is commonly recognized as his great masterpiece. It is called The Night Watch.
The reception of the Night Watch is the subject of a famous Rembrandt legend. It was supposed to have been rejected by the sitters. Well, there's nothing in the documents to indicate anything of the sort. It was hung proudly, remained in its place until it was taken out 70 years after it was painted.
Visually, it's a much more exciting, dynamic painting and utterly new in the history of group portraiture. But I would say it's a culmination of what he had been working on. It was a major statement.
The group portrait was an important new genre in the Dutch Republic. The role of the traditional monarchy had diminished. Though the stadholder retained power in international relations, domestic affairs were decided by the new middle class. Merchants and immigrants banded together in professional guilds and civic guard units.
The country itself was really established and being run by these various subgroups, these networks of subgroups. And these group portraits then help to create identities for themselves and really speak to them to remind them that they were an important part of establishing this new republic.
The Night Watch is actually a daytime scene. It earned its name years later due to the buildup of dirt, tar from pipe tobacco, and smoke from peat fires. But even restored, it is a dark painting. An undefined light source picks out the most important actors. Support soldiers bustle about in the shadows. There is even a shooting lesson embedded in the action. The 3 stages of firing a musket follow the textbook rules.
Most important for the composition of the Night Watch, however, was its location in the Kloveniersstoelen where it was to hang, because it hung in a corner spot on the far distant corner of the wall from where one came in to the room. So one would have seen the painting at an oblique angle, and the illusion of these figures marching forth out of that painting must have been absolutely staggering in comparison with the other paintings in the room.
The painting introduces elements of Rembrandt's late style, called his rough style, broad strokes and thick applications of paint.
He would use the brush, he would use the butt end of the brush, he would use his thumb, he would use a palette knife, he would use all kind of instruments in order to create the perfect illusion.
About 30 years later, an art critic wrote that the other guard unit portraits in the same hall look like a bunch of playing cards next to Rembrandt's living figures.
And then he adds a caveat. He said, but I do wish that he had put more light into it and that he had paid somewhat more attention to the individual portraits in this commission rather than to his own grand vision of the whole. In other words, it was praised very highly, but there was reason for complaint about the figures not being quite as visible as there were in some of the other group portraits.
Some see Rembrandt in the painting, and Saskia too. The artist peeks out from the shadows, while his wife is a glowing, angelic child mascot for the unit. But Saskia did not live to enjoy the success. She died in June, the year the painting was completed. Rembrandt did not paint another portrait for 10 years. Rembrandt was at the pinnacle of his professional success, but his personal life was in tatters. Saskia had died, and Rembrandt relied heavily on a live-in nurse to care for his infant son. Her name was Herkia Dirks, and soon she was Rembrandt's mistress. Among the recurring figures in Rembrandt's drawings and etchings are a toddler and his nurse. Sometimes bawling, sometimes struggling, the toddler wears a little padded cap, useful protective gear while learning to walk. These are the years of some of Rembrandt's greatest etchings. His 100-guilder print, named for the outrageously high price it drew, was worked and reworked over 7 years. Rembrandt printed his etchings at the press in his own home.
Okay, now I'm going to make a print from an etching. That is something that Rembrandt made. When you have an etching, you have something like this. You have a metal plate with an image in it, an image existing of fine lines, grooves in the metal. You can make a print from that by covering it with ink. After that, you get rid of the excess, so you clean your plate, just leaving it inside the grooves. That is where it is supposed to remain. There's quite some ink left. Now, if you want to remove that, final cleaning is done by hand with the use of chalk. That is the best, the hand is the best instrument for that, and chalk, best material. And then you wipe it off this way. This has to be done very carefully so that you don't rub it out of the grooves too much. I think this will do. Here's my plate. And we place it on the press this way. Paper on top, more or less in the middle. The whole thing is covered with felt, just to regulate the pressure. And now it's just a matter of turning the wheel. 1, 2, 3. Now let's see what it looks like. There's the prints.
Prints were affordable to a large audience. They were connoisseur collectors, and Rembrandt sometimes bought back his own prints at inflated prices. He claimed he was trying to give the art its due prestige.
The problem, talking about Rembrandt and money, he very often paid too much for certain things. It already started with buying the house.
In 1647, he valued his estate at 40,750 guilders. A great percentage of this was sunk in Rembrandt's great collections.
Well, here we are in a beautiful room, the art room of Rembrandt. He had a room completely filled with objects of art and objects of nature. Butterflies and minerals and beautiful bustes of emperors and philosophers. Rembrandt bought all these things in the harbor of Amsterdam, the harbor where the ships entered from the East Indian Company and trade their goods. And you see the most exquisite and strange things like crocodiles, beautiful Venetian glass, skins of animals like this lion.
Rembrandt collected everything. He collected shells, he collected old armor. His house must have been chock-a-block full of stuff. Many of these objects he actually used as props in his paintings. For example, there's a beautiful, exquisite little print of a mollusk shell. So this wasn't just a collection to look at and talk with your friends about, which these collections were, and which no doubt Rembrandt did enjoy pulling things out for his friends, but he also used them in his works.
Around the same time, Rembrandt hired a pretty young woman named Henrikia Stuffels to move in and keep house. She was 20 years his junior, but it soon became clear they were lovers.
In the year 1649, Rembrandt had two women living in his house, and he had relationships with both of them. The one with Geertje was finished, and one with Henrikia had started, and this turned into a knockdown, drag-out, screaming battle that broke Geertje up.
Henrikia did not leave quietly. Over the course of a year, she hauled Rembrandt in and out of arbitration. She claimed he had promised to marry her, and he was ordered to pay her an annual allowance.
She sued Rembrandt for breach of promise, and the court then asked Rembrandt to pay her 200 guilders a year, which, again, in relative terms, was a substantial amount of money. But Henrikia didn't leave it at that and seemed to come back with another lawsuit, and Rembrandt finally had enough.
There is no record she ever received any payment. Instead, Rembrandt figured out a way to have her committed to a women's house of corrections.
The place that Geertje was sent to had locked doors. She couldn't walk out. It was not inhabited by the nicest people. The reason she was sent there, we don't know exactly, but we do know that Rembrandt and Geertje's brother were responsible for having her sent there.
It was thought that work would rehabilitate these women. And so it was an awfully mean thing to do. But on the other hand, she had been given a very, very generous offer and gotten an even more generous offer from the court and still pursued Rembrandt. So I would say it was rather a draw.
With Henrikia out of the way, Rembrandt and Henrikia settled into a new domestic bliss. In 1654, they had a daughter who was named Cornelia after his mother. They never married. Saskia's will stipulated that if Rembrandt remarried, he would forfeit access to Titus's inheritance. As Rembrandt spent his cash on prints and exotic trinkets, war was heating up with England. The Anglo-Dutch War brought heavy losses to merchants and stockholders. They, in turn, began to call in payment on loans and mortgages. Rembrandt tried to pay his creditors with prints and paintings. He tried to auction parts of his collections. He tried to dodge his debts, hiding assets behind his children in complicated, though not strictly legal, drafts of wills.
There was also an effort by Rembrandt to protect himself from his creditors by hiding behind Titus. Perhaps this wasn't a very considerate way of behaving to the boy. It loaded him as a child, basically, with heavy financial obligations.
Finally, Rembrandt filed for bankruptcy in 1656. His official reason was losses at sea.
Rembrandt's patronage position in Amsterdam was second-rate, and this is one of the things that broke him up in the end. And if Rembrandt had been better plugged into the Amsterdam system, he would have escaped the worst effects, probably, of the bankruptcy and would have gotten more commissions from the town.
His estate was liquidated at auction over the next 2 years. Rembrandt would never again know such wealth, but some of his greatest masterpieces were yet to come. Rembrandt had lost his house, his studio, and his collections. With his lover, son, and young daughter, he moved to a rented house in a poorer part of town, along the Rozengracht, the Rose Canal. Eventually, the family hit upon a scheme to stay afloat. Titus and Henrikia opened an art dealership, with Rembrandt as their sole employee. His future income was sheltered from creditors. Only 16 years old, Titus became a manager for his father.
He was the kind of caretaker of Rembrandt's own business when Rembrandt went bankrupt. So there was a close working relationship between them. However, there isn't any sign that this came between them. Still, it was a tricky kind of relationship.
Commissions continued to come in, and Rembrandt often accepted more than he could turn out. But his creative resources were undiminished, and a paradoxical liberation seems to enter his work. With the struggle to establish a reputation behind him, he wrote to a friend, "I don't seek honor, but freedom." Assured of his place in history, he seems to paint more for his own legacy than for his clients, and they didn't hesitate to complain.
He got a commission from an important Italian patron, Don Antonio Ruffo, in Sicily, for which he got a lot of money, but then ended up in this nasty exchange of letters, insults, claims, counterclaims, and that came to an end. This was part of Rembrandt's personality, I'm afraid.
One client claimed that Rembrandt delivered an unfinished painting. Rembrandt's reported response was, "It is done when I say it is done." Another complained that he had left the seams of a stitched canvas visible. Rembrandt told the client to hang it in a dark room.
It was during this period, after 1658, when he'd moved to this small apartment, he received the commission for the Oath of the Batavians for the City Hall. He received major commission for the group portrait of the syndics of the Drapers Guild, and he received a large number of portrait commissions.
In 1662, Rembrandt completed two important paintings. Though they share a similar setting, they could not be more different. The first is a group portrait for the Drapers Guild. The members look up as if startled, as if looking right back at the viewer. Here is Rembrandt at the height of his rough style. The detail of the night watch is replaced with rough strokes that suggest more than they imitate.
He thought that the paint surface had a specific function in the experience of space, and not just, rough brushwork, but more than that. And it was seen as a privilege to be able to see the strength of the illusion in a roughly painted painting like the Syndics is.
The second is called The Conspiracy of the Batavians under Claudius Civilis. Lamps glow in darkness. A night of drinking is coming to a close. Hushed and conspiratorial, the men join swords with their one-eyed leader. He is the only one who looks out of the canvas. It was commissioned to hang in the new town hall, a showplace and fortress for the city's banking and government offices. The commission came along second-hand after the first artist died. Rembrandt was given a canvas measuring 20 by 18 feet for the scene. The revolt of the Batavians was a common parallel to the 1568 Dutch revolt led by William of Orange and was a source of national pride. The painting hung in the hall for less than a year. It was returned to Rembrandt for reasons unknown. He eventually cut it down to less than half its size and sold it off.
About the time the painting went up, the politics of the city changed. And in fact, the merchants who were governing the city wanted peace because peace was good for commerce. And so Rembrandt's rather militaristic image would have not been appropriate at that moment.
Suddenly, Rembrandt's personal life was again torn apart. In 1663, plague raged through the city. It took Henricia and thousands of other citizens with it. Because of the need for swift burials and the high cost of land, most victims were buried in mass graves. Rembrandt wanted something better for Henricia. Without the money to purchase a plot, he took the second best option.
She was not buried in a grave together with other poor people, but he rented a grave for her in order to provide a different funeral for Henricia.
Just 5 years later, another wave of plague took his son Titus, newly married and with a baby of his own on the way.
At the very end of his life, Rembrandt was relatively alone in this small rented house. His life changed dramatically, but he still was a major figure in the Amsterdam scene.
Rembrandt lived to see the birth of his grandchild, but died later the same year of unknown causes. His grave is not marked, but his face and art are immortal. In fact, his works have had dramatic lives of their own. In 1985, a madman attacked Rembrandt's Danae. The Night Watch was similarly assaulted 3 times in the last century. Among the many stories of theft and loss, the 1990 robbery of 3 Rembrandts from a Boston museum remains unsolved. And then there are those that occasionally emerge from obscurity.
We could talk about this painting, which many people probably don't know. But 100 years ago, it was one of the most famous paintings in the world. It was considered to be the best painting ever made. It's certainly the best Rembrandt. And one day, an art historian said, I don't think it is a Rembrandt. And somehow, it was like a spell in the art historical world. Suddenly, nobody believed anymore it was a Rembrandt. And then when you start looking, given these differences between this painting and the other Rembrandt landscapes, you start to look at the brushwork, the way he is searching for the final composition. The X-ray is dramatic, but originally he made a bridge. There was a bridge here, he changed the reflection in the river, etc. That is a typical genesis of a painting of Rembrandt, a searching genesis. He never, or hardly ever, had made up his mind completely when he started, but in the process there are changes, and the way these changes are executed is also typical of Rembrandt. I am completely convinced that this painting is by Rembrandt, so after 100 years of limbo, it will come out, I hope, again. And I think the arguments, once I start to write them down, will be strong enough to bring this painting back into circulation again as a major Rembrandt.
From monumental masterpieces to intimate sketches, Rembrandt's art gives us a window on an era of discovery. It is more difficult to find the man behind the canvas.
I think Rembrandt was one of those artists who knew how to pull your heartstrings. This doesn't mean that he was always nice in his personal relations.
Because he was not a nice man, because he did so many nasty things. I think what is important is to realize that Rembrandt was a human being, and that he failed in many aspects, and that he had success in many aspects.
Well, every age has its own Rembrandt. Starting in the 17th century, during Rembrandt's lifetime, Rembrandt was enormously popular. Then in the 18th century, Rembrandt then became reclassified as a bohemian. In the 19th century, they cleaned Rembrandt up and they made him into a respectable, rational kind of artist. And now we're constituting a new Rembrandt. It will be very interesting to see what the new image of Rembrandt is.
Bohemian or businessman, romantic or rogue, Rembrandt may still have a few surprises for the 21st century. An artist for all ages, his art is ageless.